Yo, what's good? What's going on, guys? It's me, Jay, here to do a review on the new 2022 movie that they're talking about that's really an Oscar buzz. That's many people's Oscar pick, especially for the lead actor, Brendan Fraser, and that's The Whale. The Whale is an adaptation of a stage play written about 10 years ago in 2012, centered around a man, a severely obese man, about 500 to 600 pounds, living in his Idaho apartment, and his journey to live out the rest of his days in misery, and basically, as the film's subtext provides, eat himself to death, but also his journey to reconcile with the mistakes of his past and to reconnect with his estranged daughter. This man, of course, is played by Charlie, and no last name. His name is Charlie, and he's played by Brendan Fraser. And also, the a lot of the supporting cast, like this one Mormon kid or Sadie Sink, the daughter Ellie, Wang Cho, the his nurse Liz, who also happens to be the sister of his deceased gay lover Alan, and Dan the pizza man, pizza delivery guy who delivers him two whole pizza pies, not slices, whole pizza pies each night. And later on in the movie, discovers Charlie's obese situation, morbid obesity, and is completely horrified by it, which leads Charlie to binge eat basically everything in his house in one frantic scene, and really shows the depths and despair that Charlie is going through as he struggles with being an emotional eater and trying to basically eat his life away. Well, let me tell you guys, and this movie is not for the faint at heart. It's directed by Darren Aronofsky. And of course, Darren Aronofsky is one of those guys, one of those directors that is able to tap into the pain and desperation of a marginalized group and able to talk about the consequences of life's choices on individual characters by zooming in uh, on their battles with depression, loneliness, anger, anxiety, and anxiety about the future. He's done this before when he focused in on heroin addicts in Requiem for a Dream, with professional wrestlers in 2008's The Wrestler, when Mickey Rourke, much the same way like Brendan Fraser, a star from the previous era, makes his return in a grittingly real and gripping struggle of a man to reconcile his passion, rather self-destructive in Mickey Rourke's case, wrestling in this guy's case, in Brendan Fraser's character's case, eating, with the irrevocable damage that passion or that addiction has caused in a relationship with his daughter. Much like Charlie, Mickey Rourke's character tries to reconnect with his daughter and is very unsuccessful. And who can forget that famous line from The Wrestler, "I don't want you to see me like a broken down piece of meat." Well, in this one, it's similar. Charlie is an English teacher. He's a shamed English teacher, English professor, who was basically kicked out of his job for having an illicit affair with Alan, a devoted Mormon. In the stage play version, they change Alan's religious affiliation and the affiliation of this missionary from the Mormon church to a fictionalized church, the New Life Church. I think because they wanted to avoid legal issues with the LDS Church, as we know in many states, especially in Utah, their home state. LDS is a powerful voting bloc, and I don't think they wanted to upset them, so they changed to New Life. But anyway, in the in Charlie's past, his lover, his boyfriend Alan, was in the New Life Church and was unable to reconcile his homosexuality with his severe religiosity and stopped eating and actually starved himself to death and eventually committed suicide. So since that happened, Charlie has been struggling with the guilt associated, the survivor's guilt associated with Alan's death, and have been using food to comfort him and food to make him feel better. And now has at the point that we meet up with Charlie, he has now reached the levels that he's reached, and he's got like um, 200 over something blood pressure. He's congestive heart failure. He's like on his last days, and this movie follows him around for a week, and in his desperate last attempt to connect with his daughter Ellie. He walked out on his family years ago, 10 years ago to be precise, when his daughter was 8, and he hasn't reconnected with her since. The daughter in this film, played by Sadie Sink, of course, Stranger Things fame, she can come off as a little um, bitchy and, as the mother puts it, evil. When she first encounters Charlie in his current state that he's in, she can't help but berate him. Repeatedly throughout the course of the movie, she calls him fat, of course, she calls him disgusting, she calls him a piece of shit. She just and there's one scene where he's going to the bathroom and he's walking back from the bathroom and she's taking photos, and she actually posts these photos on Facebook, and she says um, something to the effect of, hell is going to be extra hot when he goes there to burn. Basically, she's an angsty teenager. She's blaming her life's failure and her current failures in English and in school in general on her father. But unfortunately, Charlie, in his naivete, because he hadn't seen her since she was 8 years old, and later on in the movie, they flash back to a scene when she was 8 years old on the beach, in which Charlie is vividly describing to his ex-wife um, basically the last good memory that he had with his family, where they went to the beach and his feet got all cut up, and he smelled like the ocean and everything. But that's the Ellie that he remembers. He remembers it when she was 8 years old. Again, it brought me back to the wrestler, when Randy the Ram's character was similar, where he had memories basically frozen in time about his daughter as well. He even refused to, if you guys remember from the wrestler, he even refused to come to terms with the fact of his daughter's sexuality. Well, in this one, they don't really point to Ellie's sexuality. They point to that she may be heterosexual, she may have a crush on this Mormon kid, but they don't really point to it. But the Mormon kid himself has a reconciliation story. Initially, he was out on a mission. Um, he was from Iowa, and he was out on a mission, and he happened to steal um, money from the mission, and he doesn't want to really admit that to Ellie and to Charlie or to anyone. He wants to try to save Charlie's soul the best he can, to try to save Charlie's soul in order to reconcile what he's done, in order to make things right, if you will, in his life. try to make up for what he's done, his perceived infractions against uh, God, and like that was his like that was his last redemption. In other words, um, his last attempt at redemption was trying to save Charlie's soul. And then you have Liz. Liz is the nurse slash a nurse of Charlie. She takes care of Charlie rather informally. She doesn't really get paid, and that's a scene in the movie where she discovers that Charlie has over $100,000 in his bank account, and she points to an incident where um, her car broken down and she was caught in the snow shopping for him for groceries, and he didn't want he didn't want to pay for the car. She didn't want him to pay for the car because she initially thought that he only had $700 in his bank account. So she felt sorry for him, but then she finds out later, to her chagrin, that uh, he has more than that, and he's been basically keeping it every dollar he's been making as an English professor online now um, has been going towards Ellie, towards his bank account for Ellie. When um, she gets older, and of course, Liz, she feels betrayed because it's her who's here for Charlie every single day, taking his blood pressure, taking his temp, even you know in one scene, one powerful scene, resuscitating him as he's choking on the pieces of his sandwich, and you see him just devouring this sandwich, on his couch. And she's also struggling with reconciliation, putting the pieces back together of her life because she's been through this before. She's witnessed how Alan, her brother, deteriorate in front of her own eyes, and she was unable to stop it. And even Charlie. So the pain that Charlie is feeling is the pain that she is feeling. It's kind of like a symbiosis, two pieces of a puzzle. And in one scene where they're watching the 2016 election results on the news, and Charlie's eating a whole bucket of KFC, you can see the pain in Charlie's eyes, but how much Liz really um, sympathizes with him and really connects with him on that base level. So basically that's the backdrop of it. It's taking place 2016. The world is coming all around, and it does have some commentaries on our current health crisis. Not really with COVID because it was set in 2016, so it was shot before COVID. But as far as like Charlie not wanting to go to the hospital because of the expenses, even though he has it, he doesn't want to spend it all on that, or he doesn't want to spend any of it on that to go to the hospital where he desperately needs to go because of his congestive heart failure. He'd rather not spend money on that, and due to his lack of health insurance, he's not covered by it. So that's a strong, contentious political debate that we often have in our country, and we're having at that time in 2016 as Donald Trump, the presidential candidate at that time, was trying to obliterate Obamacare, and Republicans have been fighting against nationalized health care since forever, but especially in the 2010s. So that is kind of a background story. Also, the obesity epidemic um, with him is obesity. Nobody is treating the root cause of his obesity. What is causing it? He's not getting any mental health um, counseling on the trauma that he experienced with the death of his lover, Alan. You know what I mean? There's one scene. Liz later on brings him, Liz the nurse, she brings him a wheelchair. She calls it a fat guy wheelchair. Basically, it's a big, huge wheelchair, and he's able to get around easily because and there's this one scene where he's showering, and just him showering, going to the shower, and the amount of energy that he expends going from his couch to the shower. could have nearly killed him. So she brings him this wheelchair to get around in his apartment more easily. And he has this room that is basically untouched. The room where he and Alan spent their nights together, spent their time together when they were living together. But he can't, with the wheelchair, fit into the room. And to me, that was such a symbolic scene because it was so symbolic of the gulf, the separation between the life he once had versus the life he now has. That he's degenerated to such a degree that he has um, he's gotten so bad basically that he can no longer enter into those spaces literally that were once a comfort to him. They were once his solace. He is now blocked from them emotionally and physically. And that was a really powerful scene to me. And you could see the frustration on his face. One scene that I talked about initially in the opening that I didn't really touch on that was really powerful was when Dan the pizza man interacts with him. Now Dan visits him every night. He puts the money in the mailbox before Dan comes, and Dan just takes the money out. He's never actually seen what Charlie looks like. It was a representation of the outside world and Charlie. Here's Charlie's world, the confines of his apartment. Nobody sees him, nobody hears from him, nobody, sometimes, like in Dan the Pizza Man's case, even knows what he looks like. But one time, this one incident, Dan puts the pizzas there like he does routinely every night and pretends like he's left. Charlie comes out to pick up the pizzas, and finally he sees Charlie, and he is just mortified. And part of him is, I believe, mortified and aghast by what Charlie is because he feels like he has in some way contributed to Charlie's condition. Um, and he runs away in horror. And this rejection from the outside world, this treatment of other people from the outside world really discourages Charlie, because prior to this, Charlie had gotten the wheelchair, and yeah, he was blocked from entering that one room where he and Alan shared, like I said previously, but he was also, feeling some new regenerative life. He was connecting with Ellie with the essay thing, because like with Ellie, everybody around Ellie sees the anger in her. Her mother even calls her evil, but Charlie, being optimistic, he sees the best in her. He repeats this line over and over. She's an amazing person. She's an amazing person. He can't help but see the best in her because that's what he remembers from when she was 8 years old. His interactions with her are frozen in time. You know, but so he's feeling this new exuberance of life, and then Dan comes, and Dan just crushes it. Dan, his interactions with Dan the Pizza Man confirm in his mind that he is too ugly and too hideous and too fat and too obese to ever interact with the outside world. Charlie's reclusiveness is so bad that when he teaches his online courses to his students, his English students, he pretends like his webcam is broken and it's just a blank black space. He's never actually shown his face to them. But after this night, when he binge eats, and he eats like everything in the fridge, he just says, you know, on an adrenaline run, just saying, fuck it, abandoning everything. Just says, forget all these assignments, forget all this frivolous, English work, and going over these old books, as Ellie eloquently puts it, Walt Whitman's poem, just some old 18th century faggot in her comments about Walt Whitman. Excuse that phrase, YouTube, but basically all the standards, all the rule book of English courses, preliminary English courses are cut out, and Charlie just says the hell with it all and even breaks his laptop out of anger. He sends this email to them, and then later on, after that, he finally decides to reveal himself to the students. He turns on his webcam because this whole time his mantra has been preach honesty, be yourself. It's all about being yourself because that's one thing that Charlie, throughout his early life, could never really be. He could never really be himself. He was a straight man pretending to be gay. He was um, living a lie, basically. And he's ever since his world came crumbling down, he was not honest with himself. He was not honest with his condition. He was trying to mask his feelings in food, but he's telling them to rather than write what they think he wants them to write from an academic setting, to be honest and to be blunt and to be real for the first time ever. And they do write some really real stuff. And the inspiration for that comes from the poem uh, that Charlie has often reads and knows verbatim by memory. His daughter Ellie's eighth grade um, essay on the book, Herman Melville's book, Moby Dick. Now, as you remember, as you guys know, in Moby Dick, the book, um, the Captain Ahab, is obsessed. He is obsessed to a point of madness of catching this white whale. The capture of this white whale, famously in the book, is what consumed Captain Ahab's life. So, what is Charlie's white whale? What is he obsessed with? His white whale, his his Moby Dick, if you will, is the reconciliation with his daughter. That's become his life mission. He could no longer reconcile with Alan. It was too late to save Alan. It was too late to save Alan's life, but he could chase a different white whale, and through the capture and conquer of this metaphorical white whale, this metaphorical Moby Dick, he could achieve redemption. The same way the kid wants to absolve himself from the stealing of the church and achieve redemption. So his obsession becomes with saving Charlie uh, spiritually. Liz's obsession and her redemption arc um, becomes uh, her life's mission becomes to keep Charlie alive physically. So we see all these characters have their own redemption arcs. All these characters have their own um, missions in life brought upon by their guilt, by the guilt of their actions. Even Dan the Pizza Man, he somewhat feels guilty for uh, being being a representative or being a stand-in for rampant consumerism that has, especially in the arena of food, that has overtaken Charlie. That has driven Charlie to unhealthy, poor eating habits and eating decisions. So each character is looking for their redemption in different ways. Each character is chasing their own white whale to conquer, and each character is driven in certain scenes to the points of madness. Even Ellie, her search, her white whale, her Moby Dick is finding herself, finding out who she truly is. And later on in the movie, she does, I think, to me, inadvertently anyway, by accident, does a right thing in helping the Mormon kid reconcile with his family. And this sin that he had blown out of proportion as far as stealing, wasn't that bad. Now, why homosexuality was that bad and it drove Alan, the character of Alan, to suicide, and uh, stealing really isn't, then stealing is one of the Ten Commandments and the other one is not, although, albeit it is in Leviticus, but that's, added on Pentateuch or whatever, uh, is beyond me, but that's just what it is. But she's chasing self awareness. She's coming to terms with her parents splitting up. She's coming to terms with her chasing her own white whale. So each one of these characters in the movie is chasing their own white whale of redemption. Each one of them is chasing forgiveness. Each one of them has their own life mission that, like Captain Ahab in the book, has driven them to madness. And what I liked about this film was the expression of always being real with yourself and always being um, upfront with other people. Even with Ellie, some of her observations and some of her comments toward her dad is brutal and blunt. And I've heard a lot of people, um, especially those of the LGBT, not LGBT, yeah, LGBTQ and the fat phobic or anti-fat phobic community say that this movie is harsh. This movie uses harsh language, but if you think that the movie is too harsh and you think the movie and a lot of things that the characters say are too blunt, especially in their criticisms of organized religion and in the in the way that they criticize the missionary kid or in um, fat people, then you missed the point of the movie. The whole point of the movie was being real, being authentic, saying how you truly feel, getting past all the formalities of that we often see in essays, which essays to me are a symbol of the formalized outside world that Charlie and Ellie in certain ways have chosen to reject. Charlie in a destructive way by being a recluse, and Ellie in a in an edgy way by being just blunt and honest and just sometimes rude and disrespectful. You know, and Liz in certain ways because as reclusive as Charlie is, Liz is also just as reclusive. She also doesn't want to face the past. She speaks about it um, once on the porch with the Mormon kid, but she doesn't really speak about it all that much. And one thing I noticed too, each one of these characters has their own coping mechanism. The Mormon kid has his religion. Um, Ellie has her anger and her frustration that she doesn't want to break that shell, which she eventually does at the end when she finally calls Charlie daddy. You know, and um, Liz has cigarettes and Charlie has food. So each one of them has their own coping mechanism, and each one of them has their redemption goal, their white whale, if you will. And even the mother, the Ellie's mother. What does she turn to? What's her solace? What's her cover up? What's her coping mechanism? Alcohol. So um, this film is really sad and really tragic and really deals with what life is like for um, people with severe obesity. And it doesn't just look at. Oftentimes in movies, we see that movies look at morbidly obese people as something comical, like in Fat Bastard and Austin Powers, or Nutty Professor with Eddie Murphy, or they just look at them as tragic figures, sort of like the movie Precious. But this film takes a look at what really causes someone to become morbidly obese, other than just, oh, well, he's greedy and he can't stop eating. What are the underlying emotional issues that cause this? The backstory of basically his self loathing, his self hatred of himself, his inability to come to terms with his own sexuality and the life choices that he's inevitably made, and his struggle to be again redeemed, just like Captain Ahab in the book. And that's his special place. When he reads that essay, he in the beginning he suffers um, sort of a mild heart attack before the Mormon kid walks in on him. He's masturbating to gay porn. So, and then he brings himself back to his normal life by having the kid read the poem. So that basically is symbolizing there the struggle between his lustful side, what he left his family for, and his conventional side, which was his past before he left his family. And that's the inner turmoil that the man struggles with. That was the inevitable cause of his obesity. So it deals with the underlying causes of obesity and the reactions of the outside world to this obese person, rather than just a comic foil like Fat Bastard or Nutty Professor or or just utter sadness of Precious. Now I realize they're all different, and even Fat Bastard and Austin Powers and Sherman Klump and Nutty Professor touch on the disparity and the ostracization that fat people feel, especially with Sherman in the club and Fat Bastard when he says, I eat because I feel bad, and then I feel bad because I eat. But it still deals with it in a comic way. I mean, Mike Myers' character is called Fat Bastard for a reason. You know what I mean? He's a comical fat henchman. Charlie in the Whale is not that. Charlie in the Whale is a man dealing with inner turmoil about life choices, and it's framed in a similar way as drug addiction is framed in Requiem for a Dream, or a a destructive physical working environment is framed in a movie like The Wrestler, or even the biblical motifs in another Darren Aronofsky film, Mother, are framed. But I will warn you that if you are watching this film and you're going to the movies, and well, it's already out of the movies by now, but I will warn you that if you're watching this and you went to the movies and you gorged on popcorn, you may not want to do that, because the psychological effects of overeating and emotional eating are really felt on you when you watch this film. The disparity that Charlie goes through, the feeling that he feels like him being fat is the reason why his daughter doesn't want to uh, reconnect with him, because he even says it in one line. He says, "Who would want me in their life?" In his corpulous condition, his condition that he's in. He says, "Who would want me in their life?" He feels a certain level of self despair, and I think psychologically, gorging on popcorn, as people often are known to do at the movies, would not be the best idea, because you're like, damn, am I putting on the kind of weight that Charlie is putting on? But really, it's nothing to really joke about. The psychological underpinnings of obesity, the mental health issues that are rooted in people being obese. It's not just being fat, as people say. And I don't think the film is fat phobic. I don't think the film is looking at all of all of heavy set people and condemning all of heavy set people. That's ridiculous. I think the film is looking at a particular man and his struggles with weight and his reaction to the way the world treats him because of his weight, and his journey to reconnect with his daughter, to get through the fact, excuse the phrase, and reconnect with his daughter and to reestablish a relationship in that last week. I don't think it deals with how society judges any fat person. I think that him in particular, he didn't have he didn't have self confidence. He didn't have reassurance. He wouldn't even turn on his webcam. Not every fat person deals with those issues. You know what I'm saying? There are some fat people that they don't deal with that. You know what I mean? They don't struggle with that. They have confidence. We've seen it in rappers like Notorious B.I.G. and even late Big Pun. Even though Big Pun was known to also, it was later revealed because of abuse from his stepfather, suffer with emotional eating. So I think this is the first movie that really touches on what it's like to be an emotional eater, what it's like to use food as a comforter in times of despair, and how that's really an emotional um, how that emotional response is really a mental illness. So uh, I think this is um, not the obesity and the weight gain and the reclusiveness is a consequence of Charlie's underlying mental condition. I don't think that is he could have been anything. He could have been an alcoholic. He could have been a drug addict. He could have been somebody that was a cutter. But in this particular instance, he was a man who overate. But it was really his self hatred. And the only thing good in his life was, in a sense, his daughter. Kind of a similar theme like Scarface, where Scarface, the only thing good that Scarface ever saw in his life was his sister. And he and Charlie had in this film, Charlie had refused to see anything uh, bad in Ellie. He saw Ellie as his perfect angel. He saw her as a representation of what his life was like before it all started unraveling. And he couldn't see her as anything else, even though others, including, like I said, her mother in the outside world, saw her as something different. So while the Mormon missionary saw Jesus as Charlie's saving grace, really Charlie's redemption and Charlie's saving grace, the thing that was going to make him and does make him ultimately ascend um, to providence, ascend to heaven in the film, because there's this one scene when he finally gets up and he walks off his chair without his walker, without his wheelchair, just walking towards Ellie, and then he dies. His redemption is ultimately his happy place is ultimately his daughter, his Jesus, his personal Jesus, in a sense. His redemption is his daughter. His salvation is his daughter. His mission in life was to reconnect with her, and he ultimately does that. And not only to reconnect with her, but to bring the good out in her. Because one line that he says in the movie that really connects with me is he says, and Liz, again, she's been through everything he's been through. She's been through it with him. She's been by his side through everything. It was her brother who suffered the eating disorder, and her brother who died too, as a result of his ostracization. So he says to her in this poignant line, he says, I think people are incapable of not caring. Rather than saying the trite and the often overused line, I think people are incapable of caring, because we often see movies that focus on the cruelty of intentions of individuals instead of the goodness. But Charlie is so pure in his naivete that he rather see the goodness even in a bad situation than the badness in a good situation. So he is inherently uncynical. Even when the students reject him and they look at him with utter disgust, and when he goes on the Zoom, he doesn't see the bad in them. He doesn't rage at them and start cursing at them. When he does rage at Dan the Pizza Man's reaction to him, his rage is taken out on himself. It's self inflicted, it's not inflicted towards the world. So, in a sense, he is sort of like a Jesus like character in a way that when the world takes their anger out on him and they reject him, he then he then um, he then takes the anger out on himself rather than taking the anger out on the world. He then sacrifices himself at the altar of the world's cruelties and injustice and misunderstandings of him. Uh, then, and his pain is self-inflicted rather than inflicted on others around him, because never once does he lash out at Liz and say, Liz, you bitch, like you usually see in these movies where people struggle with disability and stuff. Forever Young with Julia Roberts comes to mind. Forrest Gump, Lieutenant Dan's character, when he falls out of the wheelchair and he gets mad at those two prostitutes, that comes to mind. Those people who are angry and they take out their frustrations on other people. Charlie isn't that way. Charlie sees the good in people and takes his frustrations out on himself. You know, yeah, guys. So that's my opinion of this movie. Brendan Fraser, of course, this was a stretch for Brendan Fraser. This was the kind of movie that if he was still alive, I would have loved to have seen Robin Williams in this type of movie. He was of course familiar with makeup in playing Mrs. Doubtfire, and he was also familiar with the self-loathing, lonesome recluse character and contemplative, sorrowful figure character that he played in both 1 Hour Photo and Good Will Hunting. So, but unfortunately, he wasn't, and his life kind of, in a sad way, not with the obesity, but with the drug use and alcohol, paralleled the life of the main protagonist. Um, so, but Brendan Fraser really surprised me because Brendan Fraser, of course, is known for like well, I loved him in School Ties. I thought he was going to bring that type of serious energy that he brought to in School Ties when he was a kid, battling anti-Semitism in an Ivy League university. And that character, David, took it out in the world. But this character, he brought that same kind of rage and animosity, and like I said, channeled it into self-inflicted anger and self-inflicted hurt. Whereas in other serious roles that he's done, it's been more external anger and external lashing out. Anyway, guys, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And like I said, Brendan Fraser, I predict him to win the Oscar this year. Just his incredible transformation, and Darren Aronofsky as a director has done it again. He's he's resurrected the career of a yet and brought out their real range, just like he did with Mickey Rourke um, a little over a decade ago. Peace.